think that's a bad thing. I feel like art doesn't have to like emerge out of nowhere. Like it can I can totally see like the traces of things, but that's like what history is, is that like someone like one event leads to a different one, which leads to a chain of other things.
Welcome everyone back to the podcast. We have Male Tears, aka James, who's gonna talk a lot about on his music, but also just some advice for introverts that I've kind of thought about myself. Like, man, I wonder how he goes up there and performs or makes his music. So stay tuned for what he has to share throughout the podcast and even just his upbringing as well, which will be very unique. And I wanted to ask you, James, what got you started in music?
Oh, I've always been a fan of music ever since I was like a kid. Like it was always kind of something that I've grown up around. Like my dad was a DJ in like the late 80s. So I've
Hmm.
always like grown up around like the dance music of that era, or like the the freestyle stuff. Also like, in the 90s, like when I was a kid is when I listened to like so much like dance pop and like trance and stuff like that. Like I remember like Darude Sandstorm was like unironically like a big deal to people. And so like I've always wanted to make electronic music, but it wasn't until like, maybe the late 2000s, like the 2010s, when I realized that like you could probably get started on doing that kind of thing without needing like a lot of like fancy material. And like that is like when I start to get into like the deep history of like, electronic music, is like when I realized that it's more about like accessibility than anything else. It's not, and it's inherently a genre that kind of welcomes newcomers, and it's always been that way since the start, like since Kraftwerk and Gary Newman and things like that, where it was like kind of embraced and adopted with like a punk attitude, where it's like you don't have to be like a professional or like be a virtuoso at instruments or anything to like make really great sounds or kind of put your ideas out there with an accessible instrument like a keyboard. um so that's really like what stemmed my growth as an artist, was just knowing that like I didn't have to be very versed in like, theory or anything like that. In fact, like I had this misconception as a teenager that like to make electronic music you had to know calculus or something.
And
Yeah,
it was
like
so
it's a
funny.
math equation or something.
Yeah, like it's not too complex. And I love how you mentioned about accessibility because, and it's made me think too, like it is accessible, like you're saying, the history, just even what you're looking at from that standpoint of the music. But I wanted to ask you, what actually did you feel because it was so accessible, it was easier for you to get into music and put yourself out there and just start? Or was there other things that you needed to motivate you? Or was it just accessibility?
Well, I mean, like I knew I was always going to be a bit of like an oddball in that way, just because of like my influences, or like, I'm not making like, accessible like bar rock music that like any
Mm,
person would be into. So I feel like a lot of the times like I had to get into the idea of not being liked, and that's like something that kind of like broke the ice for me, was that like those like first bar shows where it's like you're the only thing that's kind of like you, and you're still such an undeveloped version of like what you want to make. So you seem kind of like like, especially when you do like the stuff that I do, like you might seem a little bit like a joke at first when you're like next to like a bunch of like grunge influence groups that are playing at the same dive bar that you're at, with like a bad PA, and that's like all that your sound comes out of. So, like I've kind of gone past that point of like of thinking that like it's a hard thing to do. Like in fact, I like to champion the idea that like making music, and by extent like any kind of art, like I feel like it should be something that we encourage people to see it with the perspective as like something easy. Like we shouldn't make art like this gatekeepy thing that's like, oh no, like you have to be educated at like creativity. I'd rather like we encourage people to like make it how in however way they can, like even if it's like using like an app on their tablet or something.
no, and the fact that you're mentioning that too, like you said, like you're no longer challenged by that because you put yourself out there already, and you just saw like, well, yeah, I'm different, but I think what's so unique is that you're very self-aware of it, and I think that's where you're like, okay, I'm gonna take myself in a different route, and like you're saying, like it's like you have a purpose behind it, and hopefully people can see like the music you're creating. It didn't like, even from your background, like you're saying, you don't have like much of a musical like going to school, right? All that fancy stuff, but you went out and did it yourself and you wanted to learn. And I think that's the most important thing, is that you don't need to have some kind of, like, say, a paper document or something to validate, like, hey, I'm a musician, or hey, I can create something. So I thought that was like very powerful in what you're saying. And even then, now, oh yeah, go for it.
No, go on. I'm
Yeah,
listening to you.
yeah. Yeah, and I definitely think that that's needed more nowadays, because this is me just speaking, right? I probably need to dig more into the underground as well, but a lot of mainstream is very common or very similar in the sound, in sounds and personalities, but I feel like you're kind of going a different route with trying to be unique. And so that's kind of like what we need more of, not copycats kind of thing.
Well, I think that like everyone in a way is sort of everyone is kind of imitating everyone. So like I don't think that like what anyone makes is like actually too unique. When you kind of like dig into it, like you can find like traces of something else from someone else. But like I don't think that's a bad thing. I feel like art doesn't have to like emerge out of nowhere. Like it can, I can totally see like the traces of things, you know, but that's like what history is, you know, is that like someone, like one event leads to a different one, which leads to a chain of other things. And so like I don't really think that what I do is all that like against the grain, but I do think that like I think that like it's a good thing that like people don't want to always make like what's going to be the most popular thing every time. And also like for that matter, like I feel like in any era that you look at, like there's a common kind of aesthetic that goes to every era for a reason, because like even the people that we consider to be like the greats are not exactly like the most unique thing out there, because we could look at something like Aerosmith, for example,
Mm.
but it's not like it's not like that band is like so unique that you can't put them on a playlist of like other kind of like contemporary rock things from that era. You know, like everyone's kind of chasing for a common sound for every era, but I think what makes
Mm.
current day music so like special, and when I say that relative to like even the underground undiscovered stuff, is that like um we're in like we're in a hypnagogic era where like we've kind of like hit that point where we realize that like time is an illusion and like
Mm.
style doesn't have to die, and that we can literally bring back things that like we consider to be long dead and just use them anew without any fuss about it. Because like I think things like 90s style or like 80s style, like these are not like kind of time exclusive things. I feel like they're almost like genres or aesthetics on their own, which is I think that's like a really great thing. Like I love anachronism, or like, you know, things being from a different time period being kind of like revitalized for now, or like belonging in a period where it doesn't go. I think like I'm a big fan of that, because like that's what like the beauty of history is that we can like literally borrow from any time and like make it something completely warped at the end of the day. So like I think that's like really unique. Like we're not at a time where like I mean, if you think about it, like even like the top songs of like last year, as recent as like 2020, there a lot of the hits were like throwback numbers, you know, which I think is like really special. Like one could say that like, you know, the weekend is ripping off synthwave or whatever, but
Mm.
like what I like to think is more of just it's a tried and true kind of sound, you know, for a reason, you know, and like anyone's welcome using it. So like I love to see people's interpretations of it.
Wow, I actually enjoyed a lot. Like, you're like, a lot of things that you're saying, like even going back to like things not needing to be dated so much. Like I'm just thinking even like fashion trends, like they're going back to the 80s and 90s, and a lot of other things to even movies. And I'm like, you're right. Like a lot of these things don't, like, I just feel like, man, sometimes even in my own human mind, I'm just like, we can just put it at a time and put it away in a box. But like, no, there's no limitation. Why are we doing that so much? And why are we putting that on artists? And like, it was amazing how you said like the weekend is touching on synthwave, but that's his own interpretation. And sometimes we as people can be like, no, that's like in the past and that's where it belongs and yada yada. But it's like, no, you're limiting a lot of creators, or just being a little too rude with them too. And so
Right.
I think you're right about that, you know, and that's where all the other people come out criticizing. But it's like, no, like you got to understand the artist and what he's trying to do with it. And I was gonna say, I know that we mentioned earlier in the podcast too, they have shows coming up. How do you prepare for stuff like that?
Usually like when it comes to live performance stuff, I feel like that's kind of like my element. That's where like I feel like I'm the most like in the zone, I guess you could say. Like it comes like very second nature to me. I feel like I don't even have to like really prepare that much. I feel like it's almost like a done deal by the time I get there and I like scope out the area and I see like how it's vibing. That's when I'm like,
Mm.
okay, this will be a good one, you know. And like mentally, like I'm already kind of locked into it being that way. And I feel like that's like we shouldn't really like
Yeah.
put this idea out there that like one bad performance is going to be like the end of the world or something, because like everyone gets that sometimes, and like it's really hard to find your niche, or like to find like a community of like fans of music that will appreciate your stuff. It's always like a challenge to do that. And like I feel like it really just depends on like what you're doing though. It will always be a challenge to me, I think, to put out things that you think other people will like. But I think that the saving grace of that is that like in a live setting, people will be like a lot more open to like having fun with things. It's different when you're like 3 drinks into your night and you're at a bar and there's like bands playing and stuff, and it's like cool stuff. Like I think you'll be in a much different attitude than if you're like at your home alone on a Friday night just looking at stuff on SoundCloud. Like you'll be a lot less judgmental. Like hopefully everyone's there to just have fun.
Yeah, and you're even mentioning the part like you're trying to understand the environment you're in, but also not even from that is like I know you mentioned earlier too, like for you to go up there and perform and be in your element, I'm sure like over time you gain that experience. Like you said, even from how describe it too is like, you said like a bad experience. Don't take it as a bad thing. And I sometimes think of it like don't take it so much like as a losses. Like just a loss can be a good thing because from that you can learn a lot. And I feel like a lot of people like you're mentioning like mentally kind of stop there and like, oh well, this bad experience happened, therefore I'm not cut out to be an artist or etc. Whatever you can make up in your head. But for you, like, what helped you get back on your feet after, like, just say a one bad performance, or maybe it's not even your performance. Maybe it's just the audience was just maybe a little too drunk or checked out or something. Who knows what?
Well, I mean, like it's never like a good feeling to walk away from that kind of thing, but like I guess like for your own well-being, I think the best thing to do is to realize that like maybe they just didn't get it, and maybe it's just not the right
Mm.
crowd or the right time or something. I think it's like best to like realize that like sometimes it's really not your fault. As much as like that judgmental part of your self-conscious wants you to feel like it's completely your fault. I think that it's more often to do with the fact that like people are not finding their niche, or they're not like hitting their stride just yet. So like it happens. And like sometimes I've seen like some artists go from being like kind of like really poorly received or like coldly received to like being kind of like the top billing like within a year's time. So it's all part of the learning process of being an artist. And like the good thing is that like you'll have forever to do it. So I think like the good thing to do is just to kind of be open to being heckled, I guess, because it's happened to me plenty of times. Like you gotta realize that like you're not everyone's cup of tea, and you're not really like the big diva that you think you are in your head either, because like they can end up being like really good positive experiences for your humility as well.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's great stuff. Because I was even thinking like on the humility aspect is like, yeah, you know what, people are gonna do things like that, and it kind of makes you more open minded. For I was just thinking about the other artists that came before, even like listening to you, I'm thinking if I was in your shoes, I would understand what you have to go through to produce the next music and all the backlash and criticism. But it's all part of like this development for your own music and just even like the future career that you may have. And so it's kind of it's very interesting, just even with people that are there trying to chime in, and you have to kind of endure that, right, and fill it out. But even from that, do you often kind of like go off your, like, say your current audience to kind of make new music, or do you just say, you know what, I'm independent, whatever I put out, hopefully they like it, if they don't, then I'm just going to move forward with this music or this project and put it out?
I don't know. Like I think everyone has like a completely different way of like doing that kind of thing. Like some people choose to cater to an audience and some don't. But like I always feel like at least for me, like I'm at the end of the day, like when I'm making is pop music. So there's an element of like wanting to be liked, or like music that wants to kind of have like the appeal. But I think that no matter what, like I think that like it all comes out very different. So
Mm.
it's not always going to be someone's cup of tea, but I feel like you could probably get away with like making some experimental stuff if you wanted to. And also like uh the truth is that like a lot of the time like people don't realize that something that's not being well received by like their current audience can always be looked upon fondly by like a completely different space. So I'm just someone who thinks like it's not a good idea to like, you know, put all your eggs in one basket. I feel like you might exhaust yourself trying to cater a little bit too much to anything in particular, you know. So like to me, like subcultures and scenes and genre, these are all things that are kind of like no different than something like a category or like a hashtag. And like really like we're all kind of basically doing the same thing in a way. So like without any pretentiousness, I think that like we're all kind of like expressing ourselves. And I feel like you could probably like find anyone that likes anything like these days. Like we have like, you know, like the big thing is like we have people that are happily huge fans of things like vaporwave or like harsh noise or extreme metal genres. So like I feel like people should be a little bit less shy about like whatever they create, you know? Like there's a fan out there for literally anything.
Mm. Yeah, that's good insight and way to look at it as well. And even just from like from your beginnings, you mentioned that your dad was a DJ, correct? On that,
Oh yeah.
how much of it like made you or hit the music that he played? I'm not sure if that made you go into the pop direction or was it something else that kind of drove you to that road?
Oh, I mean like yeah, like that's pretty much it. Like I used to as a kid like my the songs that I thought were like the best songs ever or like really brilliant. And even as an adult, I can like look at them with a sense of respect and admiration for like the kind of work that went into them, you know, is like stuff like Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun or
Mm,
Rick
classic.
Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up and things of that nature, you know, or like Dead or Alive's You Spin Me Round. Like it's just like kind of like my definition of like what pop is, like pure pop music. It's like a completely irreverent and like not concerned with
Mm,
being cool or like being, it's almost like it's fruity music without caring that it is that, you know. It's like completely free spirited in that way. So I feel like that's like something that is hard to find in some kinds of music, and that's why I gravitate to it so much, is because it's like without any pretension. It's just like concerned with being very eye catching, which is why I feel like there's like a big kinship with like stuff like that from the past, kind of mapping itself onto like current day art scenes. Like I feel like hyper pop and
mm,
stuff like Dorian Electra and 100 Gex and Charlie XCX kind of is that way, in a way where it's kind of just not concerned with anything besides being like as big and extravagant as possible and like showy and the most like hip thing there. And I think that that's like really awesome. So like I don't take things like that seriously, in a way where I feel like there has to be a whole lot of uh you know, skill and showmanship and stuff like that. Like I just want to basically, at the end of the day, the way that I see things are an expression and also a product. So like I want to make sure that I get something that at least is like fun to watch, in the same way that like even bad music, whatever your definition of that is,
mm.
can be like really entertaining, in the same way that a lot of people like to watch bad movies as entertainment, you know. Like I think there's still a lot of value to be found in pretty much any kind of like artistic expression, like no matter what caliber it is.
It for a moment it was like so funny for me when you said like there's gonna be bad music, whatever that is to you, or bad movies. And I always thought like, man, it's just funny how people are when it comes to wanting to think what their version of good is bad for another person. It's just like, wait, what? And there's so much irony because anyone can just say that. And I think it's just that's
Right.
so interesting to go back and forth, like this genre is better. Oh, it's kind of like the whole comparison of like this artist is better than this one, but it's like really they're just making music. Let's not make it a big deal. It's great. And you were mentioning earlier too, even like girls just want to have fun. The other songs, they were very like catchy and nice, and they were so like simple. But there was a uniqueness to that. It didn't have to be too complex. And sometimes, like you're saying, some people might feel a certain way about it, but it's like no, like if I remember the '80s movies, those songs like it had its own covers, I want to say, like its own uniqueness. That's how I know, like, oh, that's an '80s song. Oh, that's from here because that's how good it was and catchy for its time, and even people are playing it now. And so, yeah, I was just kind of like ranting off of that too. It's just like, yeah, you know what? Like people are gonna say what they want to say, but in its own right, to some others, it's probably a masterpiece. But with that being said, I wanted to ask you, like say for someone that's introverted, how would they go about like networking and like music, like for yourself, getting shows or probably connecting with other artists? How do you kind of like step out of your comfort zone?
Um, I think it's a good thing to kind of develop a sense of like a persona. And what I mean is that like it's good if you're that kind of person that is a little bit introverted to kind of create something of like a different character or like a kind of different personality so that that way you can separate your egos, because in a way like I feel like if I weren't to do that then I would feel almost a lot more timid in the way that I present myself or the way that I perform or create music, because like I just don't feel like, I'm very cool of a person or anything. Like I don't think I'm like Mr. Rockstar or anything like that. So like I need, but my vision of like what I want the the person, like in the photos or in the videos or on stage to be, is not the person that I am in everyday life. So like in everyday life I'm an inconspicuous person, um but like if I want to kind of like I'm doing it for the art, as like, and not so much for the ego. Like I feel like almost like you're playing a character, you're method acting, and that way you kind of like come to terms with the fact that like even if not everyone likes you, they don't know who you are, and like maybe they'll never see you again or think about you again. So like you should always kind of like carry yourself as if like it's really just a thing that's within that moment, and it's not going to like cling on to you forever, because that wasn't even really you that was up there like performing. It's like a completely different personality that's doing those things. So like I feel like if you're someone that wants to like really put yourself out there, but you're a little bit like afraid of like your everyday kind of ego being like put on the platter, or like like you're risking kind of like your psyche in that way. I feel like the best thing to do is disassociate and just like create like an alternate, like an alter ego, so that that way it's not something that you carry with you at work, like you're doing whatever you're doing, and then you're starting to think about like how embarrassing you thought you were or whatever. Like so it's all right, because like that person is not the person that you're living in your daily life anymore. You can totally separate the things, and that way you keep your personalities intact.
And it's cool because you could be like, you know what, I'm not that person today anymore, and just keep making personas and just go from there. But it's just interesting how you're saying it. Like that's what it really is. What it comes down to is like you can build yourself up, and it's kind of unique. Like the psychological aspect of it is like, hey, maybe this persona you create on stage is someone that you wish can be you every day, but you get this opportunity to at least present it on stage and have fun and be fluid and not be like whatever, this is who I am to the world. And I think that's so awesome to encourage that, because not every day, like you said, like say if you do an office job, you have to present yourself differently, so it's a different vibe. But now I'm like, hey, this is who I am at night, kind of thing. It's like, whoa, oh, wow, there's another element to you, there's more depth to it. And I think that is cool because that'll encourage a lot of people to take more risk, and be out there and put themselves out there as introverts. So thank you for that piece of it.
Oh
And I
yeah.
wanted to ask you, James, any future plans for your music or other shows?
Yeah, at the moment I'm just I'm just taking every performance that comes to me. Like that was honestly like the a big part of it is like there are three elements to like what I do, and like one of them is like writing and producing and recording music, and then the other one is kind of presenting a persona or like a visual element, or kind of like someone that's like the front man for a band that doesn't exist almost. and the third one is performance. So as long as I can satisfy those three needs, like I'm pretty much on the same track as always. Like I'm not really, I don't see an end in sight. So like I'll continue to just put out more music videos and take some more vanity shots and like put out more singles, and like the like it's just like a constant thing that I'll be doing, is just kind of like adding fuel to the fire in that sense. And like I'll pretty much like play anywhere, um and I'll work with anyone at this point. I used to be very insular and like introverted when it came to my music. Like I
Mm.
didn't trust people with my process. I didn't want anyone to like kind of help, but I'm at a point now where I'm like more secure with myself, and like my writing and stuff. Like I have a little bit more faith in other people. So I am like, working on collaboration. So like eventually we'll see that, there'll be other people in the videos and pictures in the future. So that's it, just expect to see more content, more singles. I'll constantly be putting out something. I'll feed the audience somehow, get that algorithm going.
But yeah, thank you so much. As we're nearing the end of the podcast, any way anyone can reach out to you to check out your music or other things on different platforms that you're on?
Oh yeah, I'm available anywhere. I'm the only artist in the world that called themselves Meltears. So I'll be around, like I'm on every streaming platform there is. I'll be on my face tweets. Like on every platform, like it's really hard to miss. Like you'll know it's me. Yeah,
And thank you
we
so
out
much.
here.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely James, for taking the time out to just be on the podcast as well, and just sharing a lot with the audience. And just even that, definitely leave on the description your Instagram as well, and other things to check out on Spotify. Again, James mentioned it. He is the artist for Male Tears, and like he said, that's probably the only one in the world, so it'll be easier to look him up. But that'll be wrapping up for today, guys, and that'll be it.